celebrate Christmas in a daze on this episode of Same Name, Different Game. Happy holidays to all of you. I'm Joe, and this is the final installment of Same Name, Different Game for 2018. Now last year I didn't do a holiday episode because, let's be honest, Mega Man's 30th birthday is much more important than any holiday, am I right? But this year, well, I think I'm all out of Die Hard games to compare, but we're still gonna get festive with what I'm pretty sure is the only console game ever released to feature Santa Claus as the main character. So let's dive in with a little history. I'm not going to go too deep into the multicultural roots of Santa Claus, but the short version is that a 4th century Catholic Greek bishop living in what's now Turkey probably gave some gifts to some people and became a saint. His name was Nicholas, so St. Nicholas. In many European countries, he delivered gifts to children on the day of his feast, December 6th. During the Protestant Reformation, most places moved the gift-giving to Christmas. Although children do still get gifts on December 6th in Germany, and that has translated to the heavily German-influenced population of my hometown of Milwaukee, where children typically get smaller gifts and a stocking full of candy in addition to what they receive on Christmas. In around the 16th century, Father Christmas became a popular figure in England, typically portrayed as a jolly gift-giver. The Dutch and Belgians, meanwhile, continued using St. Nicholas, who became known as Sinterklaas, and this all merged together in the US, where we saw Sinterklaas become Santa Claus and take on many of the characteristics of Father Christmas. But it was well and truly Clement C. Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas, more commonly known as The Night Before Christmas, first published in 1823, that canonized our modern perception of Santa Claus. And in 1994, Sunsoft, a company that, let's be honest, was on a bit of a decline from their halcyon days with the NES, got the bright idea to do a Christmas-themed platformer for the Super NES and Sega Genesis. It was Rita Zimmerer, the executive vice president in charge of Sunsoft's American branch, that came up with this plan. Zimmerer was responsible for a lot of Sunsoft's success, spearheading their licensing efforts with Looney Tunes and the like, but this one didn't quite pan out. David Siller, best known for being the man behind Arrow the Acrobat, was put in charge of the project, and the Norwegians at Funcom were handed development duties on the game, days before Christmas. So just to be clear, a North American branch of a Japanese company got a Norwegian developer to make a game about Santa Claus that only released in Australia, where it's hot out in December. Now, according to Carl-Henrik, a former employee of Funcom, this Aussie-only Genesis version was actually cancelled, but not before a few copies slipped out down under. Now, whatever the case, let's go ahead and take a look at this game, starting with that Aussie-only Genesis version. It's a fairly standard hop and bop platformer, not entirely different from the standard Mario mold, with some elements of Sonic, I suppose. The Sonic elements mostly being that Santa is pretty quick for such a heavyset guy. The story is that 4 villains have set out to sabotage Christmas, an evil snowman, an anthropomorphic clock named the Timekeeper, a mouse named Louse, and Mr. Weather, an evil storm cloud. It's never actually addressed why they want to sabotage Christmas, as the sum total of the story is a pre-game text crawl that says, "These guys are ruining Christmas," and a post-game text crawl that just says, "Christmas is saved." As Santa, you set out to stop these baddies and their army of, mice, jack-in-the-boxes, ghost mice, evil VCRs, I think, and, what is this thing? It's just a ball with teeth. That has got to be in contention for the least inspired enemy design of all time. Anyways, to dispatch these whatever they are, Santa has magic, which functions more or less like Mario's fireball, except he always has it. Or he can jump on enemies, but for some reason you have to hit jump a second time in the air to assume the bopping position. Otherwise, hopping on a foe results in damage to Saint Nick. Mario, Santa, can also get actual fire, which ups his damage output and can melt some ice walls. Finally, there's the cup of coffee, which, for some reason, turns Santa Claus into Anti-Claus, the Mr. Hyde to Kris Kringle's Dr. Jekyll, sporting horns, wearing a blue suit, and bashing enemies with his sack of goodies. You're invincible as Anti-Claus, but you can't open presents or collect items. Honestly, it's really not that hard to see why this game was almost canceled or actually canceled or whatever. It feels unfinished. Yeah, there are things that might just qualify as bad or inconsistent design, but a lot of them are things that wouldn't have been too hard to correct if Funcom had a little more time. There are stages where there's a checkpoint or a health pickup literally right before the stage ends, and your health is refilled at the beginning of each stage no matter what. Now, I mentioned earlier that Anti-Claus can't pick up presents, but that doesn't really matter because all they're good for is bonus points, both as a pickup in and of themselves, and in the 4 bonus stages where you fly over cities and drop them in chimneys for more bonus points. Days Before Christmas is extremely easy, except when it's being extremely cheap. I beat this game my first time playing, and in both full playthroughs I didn't lose a single life to standard enemy damage. Only pitfalls, and maybe once or twice to a boss. And that's because the game surprises you with pits and traps, but perhaps more directly, because the camera is locked to Santa, so when you jump, the screen scrolls up with his movement, and this often scrolls what you're jumping to off the screen, and when that's a moving platform, it can be tough to stick the landing. The other problem is that everything is pretty big. Funcom and Sunsoft wanted to show off what they could do graphically, but it ends up feeling like a Game Boy game with a lot of blind jumps. Compare this to Super Mario World. Mario is smaller on the screen, and when he jumps, the screen doesn't move up unless he goes over a certain height. Beyond that, the game is woefully inconsistent with its mechanics. Sometimes platforms go in and out of walls, but then the exact same type of platform will move around instead. Sometimes, clouds are temporary platforms that disappear, but sometimes they lift you to new areas. Sometimes, magic carpets stick around for a bit after dropping you at the destination, but sometimes they disappear immediately. Sometimes, the presents you open have power-ups inside, but sometimes they have enemies, or even bombs. Sometimes, you travel through a gizmo that wraps Santa up in a present, but sometimes they just don't. It feels like a beta, it really does, like it had one more round of QC to go before being released, but here it is anyway. You can save elves wrapped in presents, but it doesn't seem to do anything. In a couple levels, you can save reindeer, but it has no effect on gameplay. But let's go back to that Mario comparison. Switch palaces make a difference. Coins give you an extra life. Stages have multiple exits affecting where you go next. None of the collectibles really make a difference here. There is no analog to the Switch Palace or the alternate exit. And this game was made 3 years after Super Mario World. Finally, the bosses are a joke. The biggest joke is Timekeeper, who literally will not turn around to attack you if you're behind him. But even Mr. Weather, the final boss, is simple. The only challenge there is that the fight against him adds completely new mechanics not seen anywhere else in the game. With Santa floating on a cloud, you can just move around at will. But all you have to do is dodge his lightning bolts, and when they hit one of these clouds, that cloud stores the charge. Hitting it with your magic sends it back at Mr. Weather. That's it.
Oh no!
I feel like such a Scrooge. But really, honestly, seriously, it's not hard to see why this game was almost canceled, or actually canceled, whatever. Maybe the Super NES version will brighten my spirits. This version was released the same year, except in Europe only, and it's the same thing. It's exactly the same. In fact, in that Sega 16 interview with Carl-Henrik I referenced earlier, he said the following when discussing the Genesis versus SNES versions.
What we did was to have the same art on both machines and one programmer for each platform, and whatever the other platform programmer achieved, we ported to our own platform, so there aren't any real differences, except for the resolution and color depth differences between the two platforms.
And yeah, that basically checks out. Super NES version looks a bit stretched because of the resolution difference and it's got more colors, but that's really about it. There are some additional stage title cards not in the Genesis version which reused a couple. Mr. Weather takes a couple more hits in this one, and the options menu has anti-claws time defaulted to 10 seconds instead of 20. I mean, they didn't even fix any of the issues with the Genesis game. The bad bosses, the surprise pits, all that stuff, it's all still here. If I hadn't looked at the GBA and PS1 versions of Three Stooges last episode, these would be the new most similar games I've ever covered on this show. The Japanese and American versions of Ninja Gaiden 3 have more differences than these two versions of Days Before Christmas on completely separate hardware standards. I really feel bad. I feel like I'm just saying bah humbug for this entire episode. But we should do like we always do, and take a look and a listen side by side. These are almost indistinguishable, but the slight nod for audiovisual goes to the Super NES version, I guess. I might need three spirits to visit me tonight to remind me of what good platformers are. I mean, when the guy who produced the game says of it, "Frankly, I'm surprised it was released anywhere." That's not a great sign. And what's really awful is that it's the only truly Christmas-themed game that I can think of. Well, I guess there's Elf Bowling. But that game makes this game look like Super Mario World. And you know what might be the worst part? It costs a fortune. Both versions go for hundreds of dollars in the aftermarket. Ha! Ha ha! Yes, that's it. That's how I'm redeemed this Christmas. I am giving you the gift of making sure you don't spend your hard-earned money on this mediocre platformer. This is how I played them. That's probably how you should play them as well. And that, of course, makes it time to give the edge. They're the same, but I guess the Super NES version looks and sounds a little bit better, so that's the one I'll give the edge to. If you're going to play it, check out that version. But not before you've checked out a swath of better die-hard games to get you in the spirit. So you haven't missed Christmas. Forget about this prize turkey of a game and go down to the store, buy the biggest and best game that you can find, take it home, play it with your friends and family, your nearest and dearest, and enjoy it with a cup of hot cocoa or eggnog or whatever. And that does it. Thank you so much for joining me. Happy holidays, whatever it is you're celebrating, and I will see you in 2019.
So the boy fell asleep in the Toys R Us store, and he woke up with toys from the ceiling to the floor.
We've got the Nintendo action set, including the control deck with double game pack and Zapper light gun for just $99.99 at Toys R Us. And we have all the hottest game cartridges at great everyday low prices.
Loved growing up with my Toys R Us kid. Toys R Us. You'll never outgrow us.